So today I'm going to be making a slightly different video than usual. I'm going to be doing like a general melody tutorial, and I'm going to make a melody while I'm making this video. But I wanted to make a video on in general how to make melodies if you're just starting out, if you're a complete noob. So the first thing, I've got a list of steps, and I think there are 7 of them or 8 of them. Yeah, 8 of them that I'm going to run through that I've kind of put together for things that I'm thinking about when I'm making a melody. So the very first thing is pick a sound that you're familiar with. So generally speaking, I like pianos and guitars and that sort of thing. So I think for this video, I will stick with the closed grand piano, which I've got here. Okay. And so there are a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is it gives you a reference for what the sound should sound like. So if I pick a piano, I already kind of know what pianos sound like. So I know, generally speaking, what my piano should sound like in the final product. If you pick a sound that you've never heard before, it's going to be really hard to know if it sounds right or not in the end, because you aren't going to be familiar with that sound. And the second thing on my list, so number 1 was pick a sound you're familiar with. Number 2 is pick a genre, a key, and a BPM. Okay, so you're choosing the genre you want, the key that you want, and the BPM that you want. For the key, I wouldn't worry too much about the key itself at first. Later on, you can change the key if you want. Now, the reason why picking a key might be important later on is because bass notes tend to sound best in certain frequency ranges, which means certain keys have a tendency to sound better, with bass notes in them. Especially heavy hitting, like 808s and kicks and stuff like that. But yeah, pick a key, but at first I wouldn't worry too much about the key that you're actually picking. Another part of number 2 on the list is pick a genre. So generally speaking, genres use specific sounds and timings. And so if you use some of the wrong sounds and some of the wrong timings for the genre that you're making, it can sound kind of weird. So for example, if you're trying to make something that sounds like classical music, but then you throw in aspects and sounds of modern trap music, it's not really going to sound like classical music. And it may work, and this goes for a lot of the things that are on my list. Is a lot of these things can be done and can be ignored entirely if you know what you're doing. But again, this is for people that are just starting out and don't really know what they're doing, and these are general pieces of advice, general things to think about and to follow when you're starting out. And as you learn and grow and practice more, you can throw some of these things out the window and completely ignore them. But also pick a BPM. So certain BPMs tend to match to certain genres. Most genres fit within certain BPM ranges. So boom bap, if you're in double time, tends to fit with somewhere between 150, 160 is 150 is probably on the low end. I generally make boom bap, between 160 and 190 or 180 or something like that. So certain genres tend to sound best or tend to be made in certain BPM ranges. So I would look up the genre that you're trying to make and figure out, what kind of BPM range does this particular genre like to sit in, and maybe start with that. And again, later on, you can change some of these things and experiment as you know what you're doing, and let's say you have learned how to make boom bap really well, and you want to experiment and try and make really slow boom bap, kind of lo-fi kind of stuff. That's kind of an example of that. That's an option. But I would, generally speaking, stick to BPM ranges that tend to fit for certain genres. Okay, so the first 2 points in my 7 or 8 point list were picking sounds you're familiar with and then picking genres, keys, and BPMs. So it's essentially choosing the things that you want the melody to be about and sit in, and the sounds you want in it. Number 3 is when I'm actually going to start making the melody. So for number 3, my piece of advice would be start on the root note and then build a simple idea with singular notes playing at any given time. So let's try and give an example of that. So I need to pick my key and BPM. I'm not following my own advice. I'm not picking a key and BPM. So I'm going to go with a minor key, and I'm going to start with F for no real reason right now. And again, later on, if F isn't really working and I think I mentioned this earlier, I may not have cut it out of the video, I'm not sure yet. But let's say I pick F, and later on my 808 isn't really punching the way I want it to. I may pitch the entire melody up or down so that my 808 is punching the way I want it to. But for now, we can start with F. We're picking a key. So we're picking a BPM. The default in this is 140, and that's kind of where some trap kind of music kind of likes to sit. If, like I said earlier, if we wanted to go with boom bap, we could go, you know, like 160, 180, 170, somewhere in there. Let's go with, well, let's go with that. Let's go with 176, and let's, in the back of our mind, have like boom bap kind of in our mind. Okay, so I've got boom bap in the back of my mind. I'm at 176, and our key is F minor. So number 3 said start on the root note and then build a simple idea with singular notes. So what is the root note? Well, I chose my key to be F, so my root note would be F. So I'm going to start on the F note with my melody. Okay, and again, this is, and all of these rules are like this. I think I mentioned this. A lot of these are things that you can throw out the window once you've practiced enough and you know what you're doing. But generally speaking, if you just start on the root note, things are going to kind of fall into place a little bit nicely. And play an idea with singular notes. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be making a pattern that is 16 bars long. You could also do one that's 8 bars long. That's what I used to do almost all the time, and then recently I started doing 16 just so I could add some more variation. But yeah, so 16 bars long. Okay, so let's make a basic melody starting on the root note with singular notes. Okay. Okay, so in this case, I have this idea with singular notes. I just start with F, go up to A sharp, and then, you know, just kind of go down the line. So once you have an idea, so I know I said I was going to do a 16-bar melody, but for this is only 8 bars. I'm going to copy this over so that I have the same thing playing twice in both 8 bars. So yeah. Oh, and the next part of that I forgot to mention was keeping the timing simple by keeping the notes on the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4 is a great place to start. And another thing you can do is add notes halfway through. So what I mean by that is you'll notice every note here, I've got all these notes on the odd numbers. So the 1, the 3, the 5, the 7, blah, blah, blah. Another way I could have done it is like this. I could have gone the 1, the 2, the 3, and I could have made it essentially like twice as fast. But the point I'm trying to make for this is keep things simple. Keep things on the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7. Or if you're going with halftime, you know, keep things halfway between if you want. And if you keep things either directly on the numbers or halfway between the numbers, when you're starting out, that's going to help things sound like you're staying within your, you know, whatever time signature, which oftentimes is 4/4. It's going to help you stay within that so it doesn't sound weird. I've got down here, adding small variation is great, but sometimes repetition is also great. So here I have the same idea happening twice. And I think for now, I'm not going to add any variation because there's really not, like I said, it's only happening twice. If I had the same idea happening 4 times, I would go in and add some variation. But in this case, I'm not going to add any variation. So, you know, sometimes repetition is great. Sometimes some variation is great. In this case, I'm not going to add any variation, but we will do that here in just a minute. We start over. So step number 4 is add some notes to that idea, but make these notes less frequent than the notes you started with. Okay, and again, simple ideas are perfect. So we're going to add another idea to this, either above or below it, and we're going to make the new idea slower, basically. You could make it faster if you wanted to as well, but I'm going to make the idea slower. So I'm just going to add a single note that is slower than the idea I have going. And by slower, I mean in this time, I have 2 notes playing, so in this one, I only want 1. Okay, so let's just start with a single note. No, I'm not. I'm going to pick a different note, and you'll see why here in just a minute. So I'm going to pick a note that's not the root note here. So let's just pick a note. I like the way that sounds. Let's go up. Let's go back down. And then maybe let's go to a different note. Okay, so we added a second idea here, and we made them less frequent. So you can see that these notes are happening half as often as the notes that we added to begin with. Okay, and something else I didn't put in my notes is when you're doing this, coming back to having an A, B, A, C idea is a pretty common idea. So what I mean by A, B, A, C is like you'll have a note, you'll change the note, but then you'll come back to the first note that you started with. So A, B, A, so it's the same thing. And then C. So this will change from whatever this was. So have a note, change the note, come back to the first note, and then change it again to something else. That's a pretty common idea for, you know, like melodies and ideas. So at the end of this one, I have the same note. I have small amounts of variation are great, but having some form of repetition is also great. So in this case, I don't actually have any ideas repeating really. I mean, I have this note repeating. So technically, if I wanted to, I could do something like this and maybe add a little bit of variation to this note since it does repeat. So that would sound something like this. So that note doesn't really work, so I might change the note. So maybe come up to the note above this one. Let's try this. Note or something like that. This isn't even really necessary, honestly. In fact, I think I liked the way I had it before. So again, this is where you know, sometimes variation is good, sometimes it's not. In this case, I don't have too many ideas repeating, so variation doesn't feel necessary. So step number 5 says copy the notes for either step 3 or 4, sometimes both, and pitch them up or down an octave. So what that means is we could take either these notes that we placed in step 4, or in step 3, we place these notes, take either of them. Sometimes you can do both, but in this case, I'm just going to take these less frequent ones. So copy them. So I held shift and then just kind of moved over and it copied the notes over. And then pitch them either up or down an octave. So let's go down an octave. So we're kind of sandwiching those other notes. And now let's listen to it. Okay, so what this has done is it's kind of made the melody sound a little bit more full and a little bit more like, well, I guess full is the word to use. It just kind of fills things out a little bit. And like I said, you can do the same thing with this other thing and pitch these down an octave. You could also pitch things up. I'm already pretty high in frequency, which is why I'm pitching everything down, but you could do the same thing and pitch things up. So now I've pitched everything. I've copied all the notes and pitched them down an octave. And that just fills out the frequency ranges a little bit more, and like I said, it makes things sound a little bit more full. So step 6 says either add a counter melody on the existing instrument at a higher or lower octave, or add a counter melody using a new sound, but while taking up some new frequencies that you haven't already taken up. So basically what that says is do what you did in step 3 or 4 and do another one, you know, like make a new counter melody. So something like this, maybe you can make it more often and maybe change some of the timing, you know, like something like this, so that the notes aren't all, you know, happening at exactly the same time as they were before. So you could do something like this. I have no idea if this is going to sound good or not, by the way. I'm just kind of throwing an idea out there. So maybe let's copy this over. But let's maybe change it in the second half. Okay, so this is a good example of me adding some variation, especially with this step. Making it kind of change over time is probably a good idea, especially since a lot of these notes didn't really change much over time. They kind of just repeated. Probably a good thing. And I don't know if this is going to sound good, but let's just listen. All the way up to there is good. It's this last one I'm not the biggest fan of. It's very dissonant, which doesn't necessarily automatically mean it's a bad thing, but that just sounds better to me. The alternative to this is not doing it on the same instrument, but instead finding a new sound. So instead of a piano, you could find a guitar, for example. and you could put it on the guitar, on the new sound. So for this step, that's another option. You don't necessarily have to use the exact same instrument. And also something else that, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but for this step, just like the other steps, you want to make sure you pitch this up or down an octave, or at least up or down in some of the notes and frequencies from what you've already done. That way you're taking up more different spaces. So let's hear what this sounds like with the guitar instead of the piano. That's really high in pitch. So let's go down. Okay, so step number 7 I have is use effects to clean up the sounds, make some extra room for the sounds you made, put sounds in a different spatial location, etc. So basically we're going to be putting on a bunch of effects to do a bunch of different things to these, including EQ, reverb, delay, chorus, all kinds of different things. But the next thing I have written down for that is, if you're adding 37 different effects to a sound to make it sound the way that you want, just find a different sound. And what I mean by that is, well, exactly what I said. If you're having to do a whole bunch of work to make a sound the way you want it to, there's probably already a sound out there that exists that sounds like what you want it to sound like. So you don't have to do all that extra effort and work. Because a lot of times I found myself like putting a sound down and then using it for a melody, and then I don't like the way the sound sounds. And so I'll put like a bunch of effects on it, and then 20 minutes later, I've EQ'd it 17 different times, I've put 2 different reverbs, I've reconsolidated it. Anyway, at that point, I might as well have just started with a different sound to begin with, because I would have just saved myself a bunch of time. So let's go through and let's add some EQ and some different sounds to these. So if you're new to FL, you can hold Control, and then you can highlight a bunch of different little of these boxes. And when you have those highlighted, you can hold Control and press L, and that will put them automatically on the mixer channel for you. And you can put different effects on them here. So let's bring this down. So it probably has some bass frequencies in it. It does, a little bit. And it's coming in. So generally speaking, you want to cut the lows of most instruments. And when I say cut the lows, I mean like the really subby lows. So anything below like 40 hertz is probably fine. I like to go as high as 50, but it really depends on the instrument. Some instruments are going to sound, you're going to notice a big difference when you start cutting out some of these lower frequencies. Like if I took this all the way up on this guitar up to here, I don't even hear the guitar anymore. I mean, I do on that second note, but on that first note, I can't even hear the guitar because I've taken away all these bass frequencies. So don't go too far with this, you know. And something I've seen people suggest, and I think it's a good idea, is to kind of sweep this until you start noticing a difference in like the quality of the sound, and then back it off a little bit. So you can do that. So I'm really starting to notice it up here. I can kind of notice it here. But yeah, I probably wouldn't go too much further than about here. I'm not even looking at the number, if I'm being honest. I'm just listening for it. But generally speaking, I start this at around 50 hertz, and then I. But again, if you're doing this to a sound, you know, and you're doing this like 3 or 4 times, just go pick a different sound. If you're doing all that, you probably just chose a bad sound to begin with. So, but a little bit of EQ isn't a problem. You know, find if there is something that's really poking out. So this was kind of poking out to me. So you could probably reduce this a little bit to the close grand. I'm going to put EQ on both of these first, and then I'll worry about the other effects. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut out the lows. So let me isolate the piano so we know what we're hearing. I don't really need all this low information down here, do I? Especially not if my guitar is taking up that low information. So on this piano, I could probably get away with, you know, bringing this up a little bit higher. In fact, I think I will. And then on this piano, I really am noticing some harsher frequencies. Like that one. Yeah, so something like this probably isn't too bad. Like I said, if you're doing this like 3 or 4 different times in one chain, go find a different sound because the sound you chose sucks. It's not good. It's a bad sound. So the next thing I would probably think about is like space. Like where are they in space? So this is, we're still on step number 7, use effects to clean up the sounds, make extra room for the sounds. That's what we did when we took out the low end on the piano. We kind of took away some of that unnecessary low end so the guitar could take that spatial locations, etc. Okay, so let's work on the spatial location thing. So if we just listen to both of these sounds, the guitar already has a little bit of reverb on it, so it sounds like the guitar is already pushed back a little bit further than the piano is. I do, however, want to add some effects to that piano just to kind of make it sound a little bit more lively, you know? So what reverb, chorus, delay, those kind of things, those things are going to push things back in the mix a little bit. Okay, so I've added a little bit of reverb to this piano. And something I'm going to do to this guitar is I'm going to add a little bit of both chorus and delay, so which pushes it a little bit further back in the mix, it back just a little bit more. I'm also going to add some chorus because I like the effect it gives on a guitar. Maybe not that much. Let's go with polychorus, so it's a different setting. I'm going to do a slightly different sound. Steps 1 through 7. Okay, so step 8 is a patcher preset for making your melodies sound better. So if we load everything onto the mixer channel, I've got both the piano and the guitar going to the same place, and I'm not really going to go too much into detail over like what's going on here, but basically it just kind of makes things sound better. Okay, so just, you know, if you want to if you want to pay the $1,000, if you want to pay for the $3,000 course online, I will tell you exactly what the patcher preset is that I'm using and how to use it to make your melodies sound better. But you have to buy my $3,000 course in order to get that information. But yeah, we can see using the EQ and the limiter exactly what's happening when we put this patcher preset on it. Let me detach this so that we can see what's going on here. But basically, it's running through this patcher preset, this secret patcher preset that you can get the information for $3,000. But yeah, when you run it through that, it does this to it, and it just makes it sound better. You can do this with any melody. It doesn't matter what genre it is. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. You just put this patcher preset on it, and it makes it sound gooder. So that's gonna be about it for the video, guys. Let me hit pause real quick. So I just hit pause, and we're gonna wait for we're gonna wait for everything to stop playing sound. And that's gonna be about it for the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions about making melodies or any plugins in FL Studio, I mostly use stock plugins. Feel free to throw them in the comments. But yeah, that's gonna be about it. Let's let this melody ride for a second. So bad. Bro, there are actually people I've actually seen people that do something like this on their music.